So in today's video, we're going to have a look at a reading activity, a proficiency level reading activity taken from the Objective Proficiency Workbook, pages 12 and 13, if you're following with the textbooks. Hopefully you can follow the video without the book anyway. Anyway, so what do you do in part 7? It's like part 7 from the exam, from the reading and use of English section of the proficiency exam. In which they give you a text which is divided up into sections. In this case, it's in 4 sections, A, B, C, and D. And then they give you 10 questions, which basically ask you where you can find these this information, essentially. No, so there's a question like, where does it talk about this? And you have to say section A, or section B, or section C, or section D. So that's what I'm going to do now. Let's have a look. Let's get straight into the video. Let's go.
Okay, so here we are on pages 12 and 13 of the Objective Proficiency Workbook. And you can see this article, this exercise. It says, strange behaviour. You're going to read an article about human behaviour. For questions 1 to 10, choose from sections A to D. The sections may be chosen more than once, obviously. Okay, so strategies. A lot of teachers here would tell you to read the questions first or read the text first. What I prefer to do for this activity is read question number 1 and look at the sections of the text A to D and find which section refers to question 1, which one gives me the answer to question 1. And that way I feel like I'm more prepared for the following question. So let's see how I would do it. Which section mentions a strong reaction to news of the writer's research? So think about what that means for a second. It means there was a story in the news, maybe on television or in a newspaper, that the writer of this article was doing some research and somebody reacted quite strongly to that. So maybe they reacted angrily or something along those lines. So let's start reading the article and see which section mentions something along those lines. A quick look at the title. It's not fair. Do animals share our sense of unfairness over displays of greed? So let's remember, before we start, we're looking for a strong reaction to the news of the writer's research. Okay, so let's go. Here we go. Section A. How often have you seen rich people take to the streets shouting that they are earning too much? Protesters are typically blue-collar workers yelling that minimum wage has to go up or that their jobs shouldn't go overseas. Concern about fairness is always asymmetrical, stronger in the poor than in the rich. And the underlying emotions aren't as lofty as the ideal itself. Children become thoroughly indignant at the slightest discrepancy in, say, the size of their slice of pizza compared to their siblings. Their shouts of, "That's not fair," never transcend their own desires. We're all for fair play so long as it helps us. There is an old story about this, in which the owner of a vineyard rounds up labourers at different times of day. Early in the morning, he went out to find labourers, offering each 1 denarius. But he offered the same to those hired later in the day. The workers hired first thing in the morning expected to get more since they had worked through the heat of the day. Yet the owner didn't feel he owed them any more than he'd originally promised. Okay, so having finished section A there, I think we can safely say there is nothing about news of the research or a reaction to it, so it's definitely not A. Let's move on to B. That this sense of unfairness may turn out to be quite ancient in evolutionary terms as well became clear when graduate student Sarah Brosnan and I discovered it in monkeys. When testing pairs of capuchin monkeys, we noticed how much they disliked seeing their partner get a better deal. We would offer a pebble to one of the pair and then hold out a hand so that the monkey could give it back in exchange for a cucumber slice. Alternating between them, both monkeys would happily barter 25 times in a row. The atmosphere turned sour, however, as soon as we introduced inequality. One monkey would still receive cucumber, while its partner now enjoyed grapes, a favourite food with monkeys. While that monkey had no problem, the one still working for cucumber would lose interest. Worse, seeing its partner with juicy grapes, this monkey would get agitated, hurl the pebbles out of the test chamber, sometimes even those measly cucumber slices. A food formerly devoured with gusto had become distasteful. So, in section B, we can see the research that the writer carried out, but we cannot see any reaction to it. Maybe we'll see it in section C. Let's have a look. Section C. There is a similarity here with the way we reject an unfair share of money. Where do such reactions come from? They probably evolved in the service of cooperation. Caring about what others get may seem petty and irrational, but in the long run, it keeps one from being taken advantage of. Had we merely mentioned emotions such as resentment or envy, our findings might have gone unnoticed. Now we drew the interest of philosophers, anthropologists, and economists who almost choked on the monkey comparison. So I'll just pause here to say that I think we found the answer. No, we can see that anthropologists and philosophers and economists are reacting strongly. They almost choked when we presented our research and made comparisons between people and monkeys. Okay, let's read on, but I'm pretty sure the answer to number 1 is C. As it happened, our study came out at the very time that there was a public outcry about the multi-million-dollar pay packages that are occasionally given out on Wall Street and elsewhere. Commentators couldn't resist contrasting human society with our monkeys, suggesting that we could learn a thing or two from them. Okay, so I'm going to read section D anyway, even though I think we've got the answer to question 1. I'm going to read section D just so that we know more or less what information is in section D, which should help us to get through the rest of the questions more quickly. So here we go, section D. Our monkeys have not reached the point at which their sense of fairness stretches beyond egocentric interests. For example, the one who gets the grape never levels the outcome by giving it to the other. But in cooperative human societies, such as those in which men hunt large game, anthropologists have found great sensitivity to equal distribution. Sometimes successful hunters aren't even allowed to carve up their own kill to prevent them from favouring their family. These cultures are keenly aware of the risk that inequality poses to the social fabric of their society. Apes, as opposed to monkeys, may have an inkling of this connection. High-ranking male chimpanzees, for example, sometimes break up fights over food without taking any for themselves. During tests, a female received large amounts of milk and raisins, but noticed her friends watching her from a short distance. After a while, she refused all rewards. Looking at the experimenter, she kept gesturing to the others until they were given a share of the goodies. She was doing the smart thing. Apes think ahead, and if she had eaten her fill right in front of the rest, there might have been repercussions when she rejoined them later in the day. Okay, so now we have a feel for what is in section A, B, C, and D. The rest of the questions should be easier to answer. So, which section mentions, question 2, one animal showing jealousy? So, even before we go back and look, I'm pretty sure I know which section this is. A was kind of an introduction to the topic, what was going to be spoken about. I think it was in section B where they specifically spoke about the capuchin monkeys being jealous of other capuchin monkeys. So we're looking for that one animal showing jealousy. Let's see if it is in section B, as I think it is. Yeah, so in section B, several times they mention the jealous behavior of the capuchin monkeys. Here in this line, we see how the capuchin monkeys disliked seeing their partner get a better deal, so that would suggest jealousy. And then down here it says, seeing its partner with the juicy grapes, this monkey would get agitated and hurl pebbles. So yeah, again, very sort of jealous behavior, jealous of the other monkeys. Yeah, I think the answer to question 2 is clearly B. So question number 3 asks, which section mentions an animal thinking of the consequences of their actions? Well, I think this was section D, the last section, which was sort of talking about the differences between apes and monkeys. Let's see if I'm right. So yeah, in section D, apes are mentioned quite a lot, and we look at the behavior of a chimpanzee. And then right in the final sentence, it says that apes think ahead, and if she had eaten her fill in front of the rest, there might have been repercussions. Well, they are the consequences of her actions. So yeah, very clearly, that is an animal thinking about consequences of its own actions. So yeah, the answer is clearly D in question 3. Question 4 asks, which section mentions any unfairness provoking a strong and selfish reaction? Okay, so we need to think about this a little bit because, of course, A talks about the topic, Section A talks about the topic in general, and Section B speaks specifically about research into capuchin monkeys. So I think the way this is worded, any unfairness, so any kind of unfairness at all provoking a strong and selfish reaction could be in A. Could be in A or in B. Let's have a look. So I think it is in A when the writer speaks about children. It says children become thoroughly indignant at the slightest discrepancy in, say, the size of their slice of pizza compared to their siblings. So they become very indignant. They have a strong reaction. But then it says their shouts of "that's not fair" never transcend their own desires. So that would suggest that it's actually a selfish reaction. It's not because they're indignant about inequality in general, rather they're more worried about themselves getting a worse deal than their siblings in this example that is given. And it's not speaking specifically about this situation. It says the slightest discrepancy in, say, the size of the slice of pizza. No, so it's giving that as an example. I think it is talking about any slight inequality, any inequality causing very, very strong and yet at the same time selfish reactions. Yeah, definitely A would be my answer to question 4. Right, so question 5, which section mentions the animal behavior shown not going as far as equivalent human behavior? Now, again, I think I can remember this. If we've understood the text correctly, I think while they speak about monkeys in section B and apes in section D, I think in section D they're comparing apes to monkeys and saying how apes have a more developed sense of equality, right? And I think they mention apes because before that, monkeys are said to not have quite such a developed sense of inequality as humans. I think I'm right in saying that. Let's go and have a look at section D and see if I'm on the right track. So yes, the first sentence in section D says, our monkeys have not reached the point at which their sense of fairness stretches beyond egocentric interests. For example, the one who gets the grape never levels the outcome by giving it to the other. But in cooperative human societies, such as those in which men hunt large game, anthropologists have found great sensitivity to equal distribution. So a clear comparison there between monkey behavior, monkey indignation, and humans' understanding of the consequences or the importance of eliminating inequality. Right, so we're past the halfway point. Question 6, which text mentions a sense of injustice from people having to cope with adverse conditions? So I think this is in section A when they talk about how people perceive injustices, right? So it's a sense of injustice from people having to cope with adverse conditions, right? So they feel indignant about having to put up with a negative situation. Let's have a look. Yeah, so I think this question refers to the story here at the bottom of paragraph A of section A, when it says the workers hired first thing in the morning expected to get more since they had worked through the heat of the day. So they felt it was unjust. They had a sense of injustice at not being paid more than the people who didn't have to work in the same conditions. Okay, so number 7, which section mentions an explanation for the irrational sense of unfairness that humans or animals may show? So I think it's here in this sentence, it says, where do such reactions come from, right? They probably evolved in the service of cooperation. Caring about what others get may seem petty and irrational, but in the long run, it keeps one from being taken advantage of. So it suggests that, yes, maybe one incident making us feel all jealous may seem irrational on the surface, but that it does have an explanation, right? That it means in the long run we're not going to have bigger problems because we won't be taken advantage of. People are not going to deceive us, or they're not going to leave us out or give us an unfair amount more often. Okay, so number 8, which section mentions an animal's feeling of injustice leading to irrational behavior? Well, I think we saw irrational behavior in the capuchin monkeys when they felt that they were being treated unfairly. So I think it's going to be section B. Let's check. So towards the bottom of section B, we can see how the monkeys reacted when one was given grapes and the other one was still getting cucumber. So it says, while that monkey, the one with the grapes, had no problem, the one still working for cucumber would lose interest. Worse, and here comes the irrational behavior, worse, seeing its partner with juicy grapes, this monkey would get agitated, hurl pebbles, so it would throw stones out of the test chamber, and sometimes even those measly cucumber slices, it would even throw its food away because it would be so indignant. And it's completely irrational behavior that has stemmed from the sense of indignation in the capuchin. Question number 9, which section mentions unfairness among humans being perceived by those who are less well off? Well, I think this is section A, but let's have a look. It's really in the first couple of sentences where it says how often have you seen rich people take to the streets shouting that they're earning too much? Obviously, rich people do not perceive injustice in the fact that they earn too much. Protesters are typically blue-collar workers yelling that minimum wage has to go up or that their jobs shouldn't go overseas. Concern about fairness is always asymmetrical, stronger in the poor than in the rich. So yes, of course, those who are less well off are those that are going to initially perceive injustice and inequality. Okay, and the final question then, which section mentions examples of both humans and animals behaving with fairness? And I think it gives the example of apes and humans in hunter-gatherer societies. I think it's the final section. I think it's section D, but let's check. So close to the top of the page there, you can see at the top right-hand corner, it talks about cooperative human societies, such as those of in which men hunt large game. Anthropologists have found great sensitivity to equal distribution. And then it gives the example of how hunters often aren't allowed to carve up their own kill to prevent them from favouring their family, right? It then goes on to talk about apes and high-ranking male chimpanzees breaking up fights over food without taking any for themselves. So yeah, we can see both humans and animals in this section behaving with fairness and taking equality into account. So that's that. We finished. There are all the correct answers. If you've got any questions to ask, leave a comment under the video, I guess. Goodbye.